The following video shows the actual development of our money and mistakes in the monetary system. Any resemblance to real people and situations is neither accidental nor unintentional. The story of Goldsmith Fabian. Why is there not enough money everywhere? Give me the world plus 5%. Fabian was inwardly excited, working on his speech, which he would hold the next day in front of the crowd. He has long aspired to power and prestige. Now his dream will come true soon. Fabian was a craftsman who worked with gold and silver, produced jewelry, but he was tired of earning a living by his own labor. He was looking for something unusual. And now, he is 2 steps away from realizing his plan. From generation to generation, direct exchange of goods has been a common way of trading. Those who supported and fed the family either solved this problem with the help of agriculture or animal husbandry, or specialized in one particular direction of trade. The surpluses of their own production were exchanged for the surpluses of others. The market was the main center of social life. Despite the dust and noise, in general, people came to the market not only to exchange goods, but also because there was always something new and interesting to learn there. However, recently, it seems that friction and disputes have begun to accumulate. What can I say? It's time to put on its feet a more perfect system of exchange of goods. As a rule, people were still happy and loved the fruits of their labor. The government was created very simply. In each communication, a citizens' council was chosen, whose task was to guarantee security and ensure the freedom and right of everyone. It was not allowed to force anyone to do something against his will or on the initiative of one person or group. This was the sole purpose of the government, and every mayor was supported by the public. However, there were problems in the market that were not easy to solve. What is the cost of one knife? It had to be paid for with 1 or 2 baskets of corn. Was the cow worth more than the chaise? How to measure the price? No one saw the right way out of the situation. Fabian proclaimed to the people, "I have a solution to our problem with barter." All the citizens were invited to a big meeting. A huge crowd gathered in the square. Fabian told everyone about his new system, which he called money. Since the case seemed very promising, the question arose about switching to a new system. "The gold from which I make jewelry is a noble metal," he said. "It does not rust or erase, and it can be stored indefinitely. I will make a certain number of coins out of it, and we will call the coin a thaler." He explained to the audience how the thaler price level would level off in the near future and that using money as a medium of exchange would be a more practical means than direct exchange of goods. A member of the city council noticed that some people mine gold on their own and can use it to create their own coins. Fabian had an answer ready. "It's not fair. As a means of payment, only those coins that will be approved by the government are valid. For security reasons, thalers will be stamped." It seemed right to everyone, and it was suggested that everyone should receive the same number of coins first. However, the candle manufacturer objected, "I am entitled to more coins than others because everyone uses my candles." "By no means," one of the farmers shouted, "because without food, everyone would have starved to death. Most of the coins must be given to the farmer." People began to argue among themselves, who should be allocated more coins. Fabian did not interfere in their dispute for a while and finally offered them a witty solution. "Since you can't agree, I suggest everyone who needs coins to take them from me. There is theoretically no limit for this, but you should be able to return the amount back to me after a while. The more coins you take, the more you have to give back in a year." Well, someone said, "What do you want for this? Since I am offering you a service and will be responsible for supplying everyone with money, I am entitled to a reward. Let's say for every 100 thalers that I give you, you will pay at the end of each year 100 thalers plus another 5 thalers." These 5 thalers, additional fee for coin rental. And we will call this fee tsinzi, interest. It all looked like there was no other way, and 5% seemed like modest requirements. Come back to the market next Friday and we will start. Fabian wasted no time and spent the following days and nights producing coins. A week later, people were queuing in front of his jewelry store. After the city council examined and approved the coins, the first residents borrowed the first thalers. Some of them initially took only a few thalers in order to first test a system unfamiliar to them. However, very soon the new medium of exchange became very popular, so that the value of all things began to be expressed in gold coins or in thalers. This expression was the price of the product, and the price was based primarily on the amount of work that was associated with production. If a lot of work was required, then there was a high price for such a product, and for things that were produced almost effortlessly, the price was low. In one of the cities of the country there lived a man named Alban. He was the only watchmaker. His clients were willing to pay him a high price for the manufactured watches. But then another person came who also produced watches, but offered them cheaper to boost their sales. Alban was also forced to lower prices in order not to lose all his customers. Soon the price turned out to be at a level that was beneficial to both customers and manufacturers, because both watchmakers sought to provide the best quality at the lowest price. It was a real free and fair competition. The same principle soon covered all sectors of the economy: construction, transport, agriculture, and even accountants and people of other professions. Clients had a free choice and they decided with whom to do business at their discretion. There were no artificial protections, such as licenses and customs tariffs, that would make it difficult for people to trade. The standard of living rose and eventually everyone wondered how life before the introduction of money was even possible. At the end of the year, Fabian visited everyone who owed him money. Some had more than they borrowed, but at the same time it meant that others now had less, since only a certain number of coins were issued to the Fabians. Those who had a surplus were able to return 100 thalers plus 5 thalers of interest, but they had to borrow money again to continue trading. The others realized for the first time that they were in debt. Before Fabian could borrow money from them again, he taxed people's property with mortgages to secure his claims. Now the debtors were not only in debt, but also gave their houses as collateral, which forced them to look for the missing 5 thalers. No one guessed or understood that society as a whole would never be able to get out of this debt trap, because even if all the originally manufactured and distributed coins were paid back, then for every 100 thalers, those 5 thalers of interest per year would still be missing. No one except Fabian understood that interest rates could never be paid because they were not additionally produced and put into circulation. It was absolutely inevitable that some people would soon be insolvent. Fabian kept a safe in the back of his shop, where customers willingly left some of their coins for safekeeping. For this, Fabian charged them, depending on the amount and the period of their storage, a small fee. The owner received a receipt for his deposits. For larger purchases, it was difficult to carry a lot of gold coins with you, and so gradually payment for goods and services began to be carried out not in coins, but in Fabian's receipts, which corresponded to the cost of the purchased goods. Shopkeepers accepted receipts as a reliable means of payment because they could always return them to Fabian and receive gold coins in return. Receipts passed from hand to hand, and gold coins slowly went out of circulation. Fabian's receipts were as trusted as gold. Fabian soon discovered that few people came to actually collect their money. So he thought, I already have so much gold at my disposal, and I'm still earning my bread by the sweat of my brow as a craftsman. It's stupid. Dozens of people would pay me interest if they could use the gold that lies here and only in rare cases will be in demand. He said to himself, okay, the gold is not mine, but it is at my disposal, and this is the main thing. Why should I make new coins if I can use coins from treasure? Thus, he began to issue coins already available. At first, a little and very carefully, but over time he began to do it more and more boldly. One day Fabian received a request for a large loan amount. He suggested to the client, "Why don't we open an account in your name? Instead of carrying around so many gold coins, I'll just give you the appropriate number of receipts." The borrower agreed and left with a bunch of receipts. He got a good loan, and yet the gold remained in treasure. When the customer left, Fabian had a big smile on his face because he was able to eat the pie and at the same time save it. He could give out gold, and it was still at his disposal. Friends, acquaintances and strangers, even enemies needed money for their business, and as long as the reliability of the payment was ensured, lending had no boundaries. Fabian was able to issue a loan for an amount many times greater than the amount of money that was stored in his treasure, which he was not even the owner, by the fact that he simply wrote out receipts. And everything was fine until the true owners demanded their gold back, and the trust of the people remained in force. Fabian's position in society grew as fast as his wealth. He became an important person, whose opinion was listened to and respected. In financial matters, his word was almost a revelation. Jewelers from other cities began to take an interest in his case. And one day they visited him. He initiated them into his secrets and explained his methods to them, but strongly emphasized that secrecy was a prerequisite. If the conspiracy had been uncovered, the whole system would have collapsed like a house of cards. Therefore, it was decided to create a secret society. Each jeweler returned to his city and, following Fabian's instructions, began to organize his own credit shop. Meanwhile, Fabian's receipts were accepted in the same way as his gold coins, and they were often deposited, like coins, in treasure. If one merchant wanted to pay someone for the delivery of goods, he simply turned to Fabian with instructions to transfer money from his account to the account of another merchant. Fabian was able to provide the appropriate account adjustment within a few minutes. This new system has also become very popular. Written instructions for such non-cash payments were called checks. At the next secret meeting, Fabian initiated his jewelers into the new plan. The next day, they scheduled a meeting of all the governors who represented various regions of the country. Fabian spoke at this meeting with the words, "We issue receipts that are widely popular, but sometimes they are copied by counterfeiters. We have to put an end to this." Alarmed governors asked what they could do against it. Fabian, of course, had a ready answer. "I propose that the government in the future take on the task of printing receipts on special paper with complex patterns, which we will call banknotes. We, jewelers, will willingly pay all costs, because we will save a huge amount of time when issuing receipts." The governors had no objections, as it was their duty to protect society from fraudsters, and printing banknotes was, of course, a reasonable decision. "And one more thing," Fabian said, "some people began to mine gold themselves and make their own coins out of it. I propose to adopt a law according to which all mined gold would have to be surrendered for coins and banknotes." This proposal was accepted, and fresh new banknotes were printed in large quantities by the government. Certain bills of 1 thaler, 5 thalers, 10 thalers and so on were printed. Minor sealing costs were paid by jewelers. Since banknotes were more comfortable to carry, it was easy for people to agree with this. Despite its popularity, the new banknotes and coins were used in only 10% of all transactions. Statistics showed that 90% of all payments were made through checks and transfers. Now Fabian has activated the next stage of his plan. Until now, clients have kept their money for a small fee in Fabian's Trezor. To get more money into Trezor, Fabian offered depositors 3% of the income on their savings. Most people thought that he would have 2% of the profit, because it was well known that he issued a loan at 5%. In addition, people did not think about Fabian's methods at all, because getting 3% per annum was much better than paying for storage. Since the number of those willing to invest was large, Fabian's assets grew rapidly, and he could again issue significantly higher amounts than actually lay in the Trezor in the form of banknotes and coins. For every 100 thalers in cash in Trezor, he gave out 200, 300 or 400 thalers to borrowers. In some cases, even up to 900 thalers. He only needed to follow the rule so that the payout ratio did not exceed 9-1, since on average 1 out of 10 customers demanded their savings back. If there was not enough money at the request, people would naturally suspect something was wrong, because in the book it was clear how much money was in the account. Nevertheless, Fabian could, for every 900 thalers of the client recorded in the book, issue his checks and cash 45 thalers of interest for them, that is, 5% for 900 thalers. As soon as the loan was paid, including interest, that is, 945 thalers. 900 thalers were crossed out in the debit and Fabian kept 45 thalers in himself. It was not difficult for him to pay the depositor 3% for the initial concrete contribution of 100 thalers. It turns out that for any contribution of his clients, he had an annual income of 42%, when most observers attributed him only 2% of the profit. Other jewelers, privy to the secret, did the same. They all created money out of nothing, just with the stroke of a pen. And in addition, they demanded for it interest. Of course, they did not mint coins themselves, but entrusted this matter to the government, which printed money and minted coins, which were then distributed by jewelers through a loan to the people. Fabian only bore the production costs. Most people thought that the government cared about the supply of money. They also believed that Fabian gives out only those funds that others have deposited with him as savings. Oddly enough, deposits did not decrease if they were given to others on credit. If everyone tried to cash out their accounts in one day, the fraud would be revealed. One fine day, a thoughtful entrepreneur turned to Fabian. "Charging interest is wrong," he said. "Every time you lend 100 thalers, you take back 105 thalers. The additional 5 thalers can never be paid, as they do not exist. Farmers produce food, industry produces manufactured goods, and so on. And only you produce money. Suppose there are only 2 entrepreneurs across the country who act as an employer for everyone else. Each of them takes 100 thalers. 90 thalers are spent on labor and other expenses, and 10 thalers remain as profit. The total purchasing power is 90 plus 10 multiplied by 2, that is, 200 thalers. To pay you, we have to sell all our products for 210 thalers. Even if one of us actually manages to sell all the products for 105 thalers, the other would be able to get a maximum of 95 thalers. In addition, he will not be able to sell some of the products, because there is no money with which it could be bought. He will owe you 10 thalers, which he will be able to repay only if he borrows even more money from you. Such a system does not work." The entrepreneur continued, "Obviously, you have to put into circulation 105 thalers, namely 100 for me as an entrepreneur and 5 thalers, which you will spend yourself, then 105 thalers will be in circulation and the debt can be repaid. Fabian listened in silence and finally said, "Economics is a very complex science, my dear. To understand it, it is necessary to study this subject for a long time. I will pay due attention to the issues you mentioned, while you take care of your questions. You have to work more efficiently, increase production, reduce costs and become a good entrepreneur. At the same time, I will always be happy to help you." The visitor left dissatisfied. There was something wrong here, something in Fabian's methods was wrong, and he deftly evaded the questions put to him. But Fabian was widely known among people as an expert, and objections were useless. In addition, the economy was in a stage of rapid development and the country was flourishing. To cover the interest on borrowed funds, merchants were forced to raise their prices. Workers complained that their wages were too low, but employers did not want to pay higher wages, pointing out the danger of bankruptcy. Farmers were not paid enough for their products, and many housewives complained about excessively expensive products. More and more people became beggars. And even friends or relatives did not have the means to help them. People forgot about the real wealth of the country. Fertile soil, forests, mineral resources and animal husbandry. Everything revolved around money. Money has become the supreme good and has always been a scarce commodity. But no one questioned the system. It was believed that the government manages these mechanisms and should know what it is doing. Some people, joining their efforts, founded free credit and financial institutions. This made it possible to offer 6% per annum or more, which significantly exceeded Fabian's rate of 3%. But this could only be done by free institutions that had their own funds. Unlike Fabian, they were not authorized to create money out of nothing, just by making an entry first in the book. These free financial institutions annoyed Fabian and his associates, so they created their own. By buying up mostly competitor firms before they started to flourish, after which all financial institutions are paying orders or under their control. The macroeconomic situation continued to deteriorate. Workers said that their bosses were making too much profit, and employers, in turn, considered their workers lazy and inefficient. Everyone blamed each other. The governors did not see a solution to the problem. Besides, it seemed that the problem of poverty should be solved first of all. Social programs were introduced, and every resident was legally obliged to make contributions. This, in turn, angered the townspeople, who lived according to old customs, where neighbors help each other in emergency situations voluntarily. These obligations are nothing more than legalized robbery, people said. Everything that you take away from everyone against their will, no matter for what purposes, is equivalent to theft. But everyone felt lonely and powerless, afraid of being held accountable and going to jail for non-payment of taxes and fees. Although social programs briefly eased the situation, they could not thoroughly and permanently solve these problems. On the contrary, they soon returned, and with them an even greater demand for money. Social spending has reached sky-high levels. The maintenance of an expensive administrative apparatus also went beyond reasonable. Most of the members of the government were honest people with honest intentions. They did not want to burden their citizens with additional expenses. Therefore, they resorted to an extreme case, to borrow money from Fabian and his associates. At the same time, they had no idea whether they would ever be able to pay off their debts. Parents could not pay for their children's studies, they could no longer even afford a doctor. Even transport companies went bankrupt, there just wasn't enough money. Step by step, the government was forced to take over all these functions and manage them. Teachers, doctors and many other professional groups have become civil servants and officials. A few received satisfaction from their work. They regularly received salaries, but at the same time lost their independence and identity. Each of them was just a cog in a giant machine. There was no more room for personal initiative. Professional merits were mostly ignored. The salary had a narrow framework and was appointed. Promotion took place only when the boss retired or died. In desperation, the governors decided to once again seek Fabian's advice. They thought he was very smart and competent. And in financial matters, he always seemed to have a ready-made solution. He listened to them, thought about it and said, "Many people do not cope with their problems. They need someone to step in and solve all their worries. Of course, you will agree that most people have a right to happiness in meeting basic needs. After all, we are supporters of the main principle that all people are equal among themselves. In order to balance the situation, it is necessary that the surplus of the rich flow to the poor. It doesn't work any other way. You need to introduce a step-by-step tax system. The more a person has, the more he has to pay. Tax each according to his ability and give to each according to his need. For example, schools and hospitals should be free for low-income people." He preached to them for a long time about high ideals and ended with the words, "And don't forget that you owe me money. And you've owed them to me for quite some time. I can meet you halfway, suspend the repayment of the principal debt, but you have to pay me at least interest. The main debt remains, but interest payment is mandatory." No one had any doubts about the correctness of Fabian's philosophy. The government has actually introduced a progressive income tax. The more someone earned, the higher the interest rate at which they were taxed. No one liked income tax, but everyone paid because otherwise they risked going to jail. Merchants were again forced to raise the prices of goods, and workers again demanded higher wages, after which many employers were forced to replace part of the workforce with machines or became bankrupt. Thus, the unemployment situation only worsened, which required the government to introduce new models of social assistance and the introduction of unemployment benefits. The government has introduced tariffs, subsidies and other protective measures to keep various industries from collapsing and save jobs. Here and there people had questions: what is the purpose of production, to produce goods or to produce jobs? With the situation further deteriorating, the government tried to maintain stability by regulating prices and controlling wages. The treasury was replenished through VAT and all other types of taxes. Someone once said that a loaf of bread on the way from the combine to the housewife was taxed by more than 5 to 10 different taxes. Now it was the turn of experts who sometimes rose to the cabinet, but who mostly met at closed meetings from year to year and were only able to submit documents without content. At best, they recommended further reforms of the tax system, but the total amount of taxes and fees did not stop growing. Fabian relentlessly demanded his interest. This position swallowed up a large share of tax revenues to the treasury. This led to a completely new form of politics, namely the politics of parties. People were arguing with each other about which party could solve the problems better. They talked about personalities, ideologies, they threw labels and arranged screams on any topic, but not about the main problem. A quiet hopelessness was spreading in the governing bodies. The true goal is total control. It got to the point that in one city the amount of interest payment exceeded the amount of income. The amounts of unpaid interest were growing all over the country, and another percentage, the so-called compound interest, began to be charged for overdue interest. Thus, the real wealth of the country gradually passed to Fabian and his close friends, either in money, or through the transfer of property rights or growing influence and control through supervisory boards. But the control was still not comprehensive. The secret group knew that they would only sit securely in the saddle when they would hold absolutely every single person under the whip. There was not enough money everywhere. Many people have become unemployed and destitute. Social systems could not take care of everyone, and the people began to rebel. Fabian convinced the government to start a war and kill two birds with one stone. Firstly, war is the best way to unite people in the fight against a common external enemy, and secondly, it was the best way to get rid of public debt by exploiting other countries after the victory. To launch the war machine, Fabian initiated the construction of factories and gave their owners money to make bombs, gave money to the military, and in the end provided high-interest loans to the war victims for extensive reconstruction. Then there were even more generous loans under the guise of economic development. This system with all its consequences was so successful that many countries had not only external debt, that is, a loan from Fabian, but also took part in various military operations. Fabian ensured the balance of power of the powers in such a way that each country could be forced and drawn into hostilities with the other. Fabian did this when one of the countries ignored Fabian's advice, did not pay its debts or tried to run its own independent monetary system. Fabian financed, mainly through figureheads, organizations or secret services, the victim country of the attack, so that the war would last as long as possible, and then forced him to pay for his loans by plundering the infrastructure and natural resources of the conquered country. Most of the citizens who criticized the insidious system were silenced by putting them under economic pressure or simply ridiculing them. To do this, Fabian and his entourage bought a significant part of newspapers, television and radio and planted selected loyal leaders there. Many of these media executives sincerely tried to improve the world, but they didn't notice how they were being used. The solutions they came up with were treating the symptoms, not investigating and eliminating the cause. There were quite a few newspapers and magazines, some for adherents of left-wing views, others for adherents of right-wing views, others for the liberal center, as well as magazines for workers, for entrepreneurs. You could read and write whatever you wanted, but only as long as the cause of all the problems was not touched upon. Fabian's grand plan was nearing completion. The whole country, and not just one country, all owed him money. Through the education system and the mass media, he mastered control not only over the mood, but also over the human mind. What people thought and believed was, in fact, completely in his hands. If one person has much more money than he could spend in his entire life, what other special pleasure could he derive from this world? For the self-styled elite, the answer was clear: power. Naked unbridled power over other people. Idealists were very skillfully placed in the media and in politics, and so in fact were neutralized. But the real control fans with a special mentality of the lord and ruler, whom Fabian was looking for, he found among the lords of financial dynasties obsessed with domination. Most former jewelers have developed such a mentality. Their boundless wealth no longer satisfied them. They were in search of a new satisfaction, which consisted in dominating the masses. These people thought they were superior to everyone else. Dominating others is our right and our duty. The masses do not know what is good for them, and they need to be herded into a herd and pointed in the direction, and we were born to do it. Everywhere and everywhere, in the city and in the countryside, Fabian and his entourage controlled numerous credit institutions. It is quite possible that they were private companies of different owners, but despite the apparent competition, they worked closely together. With the government's blessing, a central bank was created, which was not even based on its own capital, no, and here the creation of money was based on ensuring the savings of the population. Wherever you look, debts. Externally, this reserve system created a serious kind of regulation of monetary supply and the personification of government functions. But, oddly enough, a representative of the government or a leading state official has never been elected to the Executive Council of the Central Bank. The government no longer made debts directly from Fabian, but appealed to the central bank. At the same time, the tax revenues of the following year were considered as collateral for the loan. This was done in accordance with Fabian's plan, namely, to divert suspicion from his own person and expose it as a method of public administration. Backstage, of course, he was still pulling the ropes. Fabian's structureless system of control over all government affairs was so perfect that he once, bragging, blurted out, "If I manage the country's money, then I don't care who makes its laws." It didn't matter which party ruled. Fabian controlled the money, finances, blood and life of the entire nation. The government received the money and any subsequent loans were subject to interest. Larger amounts of money were directed to all types of social benefits, and the government did not have time to pay interest, let alone fully repay the principal debt. Sometimes someone asked himself, if the monetary system was created by man, then surely it can be adapted to the needs of people, so that it serves people and does not suppress them, right? But such people were always in the minority and their voices were drowned in the infernal noise that was caused by the eternal search for the missing 5 thalers as a percentage for the loan. The government, and with them parties of different colors came and went. Black, red, yellow, green, only the principle remained the same. No matter which government was in power, year after year Fabian was getting closer to the ultimate goal. The laws of man did not matter. People were taxed from head to toe, they were no longer solvent. Now it's time for Fabian's last great move. 10% of all money was still in circulation in the form of banknotes and coins. With cash in their pockets, people still had at least some control over their own lives. This last bastion of individual freedom had to be abolished without arousing suspicion. It could be argued that this is supposedly a security issue. Checks were no longer accepted outside the community. When traveling, no one wanted to carry cash with them, so a solution that was convenient for everyone was very welcome. Of course, Fabian had a suitable solution to this problem. His organization provided everyone with a plastic card that bore the name of the owner, a photo, and an identification number. It was only necessary to provide this card when making purchases. Merchants contacted the central computer and checked the credit line, after which the client was given the opportunity to buy up to a certain amount as much as he liked. The credit card was made additionally attractive by the fact that no interest was charged for repayment at the end of the month. However, merchants had significantly higher costs, which in turn were reflected in the price for the final product and thus the fee was transferred to the customer. Fabian and his entourage enjoyed an excellent reputation, they were literally seen as pillars of society, their comments on finance and economics were accepted almost as religious dogmas. Many small businesses were dying under the growing burden of fees and taxes. Special permits and approvals were introduced for all kinds of methods and procedures, so that other firms could barely stay afloat. Fabian owned all the major companies, each of which had hundreds of subsidiaries. The competition between these large companies was an imitation. In the end, all competitors were squeezed out of the market. Plumbers, auto mechanics, and most other artisans and small businesses suffered the same fate. They were absorbed by Fabian's large corporations, which existed under the protection of the state. Fabian called for the final abolition of coins and paper money, so that there would not be a single company and not a single person who could do without loans and the ubiquitous computer system. If someone had lost their credit card, according to Fabian's plan, they would have been forcibly tattooed with a citizen's identification number on their arm, which could be read under a special light and transmitted to a computer, because without such an identity document, no one else would be able to buy or sell something. Each computer should be connected to a giant central computer, where all the information about each person would be stored. That way Fabian would know everything about everyone. Once this was achieved, he would have ultimate full control over all the peoples of the country. And soon the whole earth